Turn your living room into a joyful, hands-free playroom with CoComelon Sing and Play with JJ. Your child sings, moves, and learns right alongside JJ and friends, all on the big screen. It's designed thoughtfully to spark speech, rhythm, and coordination through songs and active play. Try an ad-free, safe, and interactive way to make screen time part of their learning and growth. Parents love how easy it is, voice-controlled and frustration-free. Kids love every moment of singing, laughing, and playing along. It's fun for them, and it's feel-good for you. Available now in the Volley app on your smart TV. Just search Volley in your TV's app store and start your free trial of CoComelon Sing and Play with JJ today. That's CoComelon Sing and Play with JJ, available now in the Volley app on your smart TV. Search Volley and start your free trial today.
Volley. Welcome to Homeschooling Outside the Box, the podcast that encourages and equips moms to homeschool an outside-the-box child. Hey there, I'm Cindy Renna, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Nathan Clarkson. He is the author of the new book, Good Man. It's Nathan's second time on the show, and I'm just thrilled to share him and his new book with you lovely listeners. Nathan, do you want to say hello to everyone?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, Cindy. It's great to be here.
Thank you for coming back. You had actually mentioned that I think you were working on Good Man when we spoke last time. And so, I mean, even right then, I thought, oh, I've got to have him back on because I know that everybody is going to want to know about this book. And so we are just so excited to hear more about it. But before we get started specifically on the book, why don't you give us a little background? Because I know you're not only an author, you are a filmmaker and an actor, and you're very multifaceted. So I'm sure a lot of that led up to the writing of this book. So can you talk to us about how your career sort of ended up being an arrow that pointed you in this direction?
Absolutely. You know, having been a home-educated kid, you're taught from a young age that it's great to explore all these kind of different things. And so as an adult, I find myself still doing that, exploring all these different outlets to the creativity and kind of messages God has put on my heart. And, you know, it's interesting, my desire and love have always revolved around stories, and that's something I found at an early age. That, you know, as a little boy, I loved when my mom would read me stories of heroes, stories of historical figures and great people living in great tales. And so I think as I grew older, I just wanted my life to revolve around stories because I saw that stories were the things that shaped us and moved us and affected the world in such a powerful way. You know, Jesus, he changed the entire world by telling stories. And so for me, it was something that was kind of calling and leading me. And I was trying to figure out, how do I use my gifts and my love for story, and how can I use those in different ways in the world? And what I ended up finding was, in one way, it was filmmaking, and I loved being part of films. I love acting in them. I love writing them and creating them, and that brought me to Hollywood and New York. And I have my own film production company now that makes independent films. And then it also brought me to acting, and I got to be in other stories and live out tales and live out great stories of great people and explore what it's like to be human on screen and these different characters I would get to play. And it also brought me to writing, which I get to explore in my words, and I get to explore how stories affect us. And then I think in my years of exploring all these things, I saw that in my own generation and in me, in the men around me, that they hadn't caught this image of themselves being in a story, being called to something greater. And so I wanted to sit down and write a book, both for myself and for others, that would call men specifically, from boyhood to adulthood, call men back into the story that God has for us to tell, that we are a part of an epic, that we can be a part of something great in the story that God is telling in the world, and that God created us for a purpose. He created us to live in a particular way, that we have intention behind who we were created to be. And I wanted to inspire men to find who that was in their creator and the story that God has for us to tell. And so all those things kind of led up to this book, and me being passionate about helping myself as a man who's still on the journey, and other men find who they were created to be and the story that God has for us to tell.
That's fantastic. And I love that you mentioned, so much of it is based on story. And depending on what your beliefs are, you may or may not realize, that's what life is. I mean, this is God's story. And we play parts in it. And so that is a great honor to see ourselves in sort of roles in the story. But you're right. I do think a lot of people sort of take an onlooker view, and they don't realize necessarily that we have parts to play.
Absolutely.
And so you mentioned you felt like men in your generation had not caught this vision. And so why do you think now more than ever? Because I agree with you. I think there is definitely something missing. But why do you think it is that we need this book to help us create good men? And what is a good man? What is it that is not happening because more people have not caught this vision?
That's a great question. And that question is kind of what led me to write the book. And I think if anyone looks around in the world today, whether across the headlines or on TV, I think, or in the news, we find that men very obviously are in identity crisis. And, whatever it is, men very often are destructive or prideful or angry or abusive or just passive. And I see this so often, both in secular culture and even Christian culture, and whatever culture you might come from. I see that men have lost their sense of who they are and who they're supposed to be. And I think when this happens, you start seeing things that, like we've seen in the news, whether it's shootings or abuse or whatever it might be, or corruption, and you start seeing men lose their way. And when men lose their way, they hurt the world. Like when any of us lose our way, when any of us don't know who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to be, we're going to hurt the world around us. And so I think we see that happening. I think that happens as a result of both culture and everything around us giving men very mixed messages about who we're supposed to be. When I think about the term, what is a good man? I have all these images pop into my head, and a lot of them are amalgamations of things I've seen as a kid, whether it's comic books and the superhero, or, a cool James Bond guy, or an action star, or maybe, it's a soldier or whatever it is. And so we have all these images in our head that aren't the complete version and vision of what a man is. And so I wanted to explore that in this book and say, who are we actually created to be beyond all the images that we're given, either from family or our culture or media, whatever it is. I want to find beyond just the image, beyond just the look and the shell of what we're told a man is. I want to find who men were actually created to be. And so, I think it's an important thing today, because I think that right now we see the destruction that happens at the hands of men who don't know who they're meant to be. But I think conversely, if we saw men take hold of this image, take hold of this story, take hold of this identity that gives them value and purpose and direction, that you'd start not only seeing less bad things happen, but you'd start seeing more good things happen. You would start seeing men who stood up for what's right, men who protected instead of prayed, men who decide to make beautiful things in the world instead of just take greedily from it. So I think when we find our identities of who we're made to be, we'll actually start seeing the world become a better place, because that's all part of the identity that God has called us into. And specifically for men, when men find out who they're created to be, we'll start seeing the world around us not only stop having bad things happen, but we'll also see really wonderful and beautiful things happen the more men who can take hold of this vision for who we were created to be.
And that's so good. You touched on, society. So this is not something that happens in a vacuum. I mean, so if a man decides, well, I'm just going to do my own thing, I'm going to be my kind of person, I'm not going to care about the way that affects anybody else. I mean, that's impossible. So what kind of man you are is going to affect your family. It's going to affect society, any structured thing you're a part of, your church, your community, it's going to have a ripple effect
Absolutely.
on all of that. And I love your awareness that you mentioned, who we're looking, or who boys are looking to, the James Bond characters, the superheroes, you are being watched, whether you realize it or whether you want to or not. And I remember, and I can't, maybe the athlete who said it, it was probably in the 90s or 2000s. They said, I'm not a role model. And I can't remember who it was. I think it was a basketball player, but I remember thinking, you're not allowed to decide that.
Yeah.
You are a role model. If you are in the public light, you are being watched. And even in our communities and churches and families, I watch the way my boys look at my husband, and I always tease him and I tell him, I said, did you know you were a superhero? Because the way they look at him. So, right. I think part of being a good man is probably accepting the fact that you owe it to somebody else, not just yourself, and obviously you owe it to God. But just that it's going to affect so many other people, your decision.
That is a great point, because I think, oftentimes we live in a society that says, do what you want, don't think about anybody else, kind of live your life how you find your own happiness, do what you want. And I think part of being a good man is realizing exactly what you said. Men are fathers, they are brothers, they are sons, they are coworkers, they are church members. The lives that we lead affect so many people around us, and depending on the choices we make, they can affect the people around us for good or for negative. And it's so great to hear, like your husband, who you call a superhero, your boys are looking up to him and they're seeing an image of the men that they want to be, as your husband is following the image that he's trying to be. And so it's a chain effect. The choices that men make will affect, like you said, everyone around them. And that's just human. The choices that we make, regardless, will affect people around us. So it is, I hesitate to use the word responsibility, but it's true. We do have a responsibility to take ownership of our lives and know that our choices and who we become and who we are becoming will matter not just to us, but to many other people. That's a great insight.
Yes, absolutely. And okay, so going back to the idea of a good man, because, we touched on the soldier and the James Bond and the superhero, all these different, we think little boys, they think men are strong and brave and, these different things, but there are so many characteristics to a good man. You've listed 15 here in your book as your chapter. And I love it because I think we get it confused with personality, like that men, like, okay, the protector role, that might look like violent or angry or something, but it doesn't have to. You can be a protector and be gentle.
Absolutely.
So talk to us about the 15 ways. What are the, because I love it. It's such a whole picture. You can be a man and still be healthy, is one on your list. That's like an okay thing to do. You don't have to eat giant burgers with sauce slipping out, like you can care about what you're putting in your body and still be a man. So
Absolutely.
Talk to us about what characteristics or what traits make up a good man.
Yeah, it's so funny because I think we all have this idea, and I've talked to a lot of guys, and I ask what is a real man, the quote unquote real man to you, and they all kind of like, oh, I don't know, one who's really muscular and knows how to woo a woman and wears a leather jacket and can fight and punch. And it's so funny because maybe there are some parts of a man in there, but when I look at the good men in my life, like my brother and I are so very different. I am more talkative and lively and argumentative, and he is gentle and he is thoughtful and he's introverted, and we are so very different, but we are best of friends, and he is a good man and I am a good man, and and we're totally different. So a good man doesn't look like an exterior thing like you're talking about. And in the book, I wanted to explore what in these chapters, in these different aspects of what makes a good man, because I wanted to show that a good man probably is outside the bounds of what all of us are comfortable with, perhaps, or at least the image in our head. And it is sometimes a hard thing because you're right. A good man is a strong protector, but he's also kind. And a good man is, resolute and can take a lot, but he also has emotions and knows how to healthily work through them and display them in the right places. And so I wanted to find the nuance in what makes up a man and an identity, and kind of get rid of these cultural or even familial implications and pictures of what a quote unquote real man is, and find a more truer, more whole image of what that looks like. And like you said, a man can be healthy. And, I've seen so many commercials. A real man, they don't eat salads. I'm like, really? That's the definition of what a real man is? That's such a small definition. And I think in fact, I'd say a real man is totally secure in eating a salad because he takes care of his body and he sees that as something worthy to be invested in, and so I think there's all these aspects that sometimes we take for granted that we never really thought about, that a real man does this, a real man doesn't do this. And I wanted to explore in these chapters the nuances that maybe we forget on either side, that a real man is strong, but he's also tender, and et cetera, et cetera. So it is interesting. It's a hard thing, removing these images and that we've grown up with, or we've seen of what a quote unquote real man should be, and finding a whole new image of what actually men are called to be.
Now, you're saying that you're finding something, which means it already exists. So this is not something you've just made up. And knowing enough about you, I'm sure one of your top references was Jesus. I mean, so these are traits that you're pulling from somewhere else, right?
Absolutely. The model, I say this actually in the opening, some of the opening paragraphs, is I've been so blessed to have so many good men in my life to look up to, but the ultimate man that I look to see, the man who's created as men were meant to be, is Jesus. In his character, I find the totality and the fullness of who men are called to be. And so we're not just guessing at this. We're not just, stumbling along, well, maybe this is it, maybe that's it. We actually have a model, we have a vision of who men were created to be, and it looks exactly like Jesus. And again, all these things I talk about in the book, that a man is supposed to be protector and strong. You see Jesus protecting the woman who was about to be stoned, and he's strong, but you also see him being tender as he gently bends down and connects with her on an emotional level. You see him you see a healthy anger when he's righteously standing up and tossing over the tables in the temple. But then you see him gently making food for his disciples. And so you see this whole picture of a man, where I feel like we're living in an age either we don't have a picture of a man, or there's just so many half pictures. And so I love that we actually do have an image of who men were created to be, and that is a basis for everything in my book. It's all based around moving towards the image of God, of Christ, and who he was, and how can we make ourselves like that and find ourselves in that, who we were made to be.
Yeah. And this is such a great complete list, and it's something that, even as women, we can say, wow, steering our daughters towards this. How do we recognize a good man? So that's my question is, who is this book for? But before you answer, I feel like it's for everyone. I feel like everybody could benefit from it, but I know you did write it with specific age groups or a specific audience in mind.
Absolutely. Well, I think whoever reads it is going to connect to it differently depending on who they are and, their own personal perspective. I wrote this essentially to myself. If I was looking for the specific audience, it's to the men who have a desire, who living in the world, who have a desire to be good husbands, good fathers, good sons, men who want to find that identity and are searching and haven't and know that they have failures and they have flaws, but they want to stay on that path and continue on that path and walk that path towards who we created to be. And so this is for men who are struggling to find that in the world today. But also I've had many moms and wives write me and say, this book I read, and it was an eye opener because it gave me a perspective into what men are dealing with today, even though I'm not one, what my husband is dealing with, what my sons are going to deal with. And so this is for any man who's entering the world and trying to, self-actualize, find himself. And as he begins to find his identity, I hope this book can be a help into pushing you towards finding that identity in God and in who men were created to be.
Yeah. So in other words, moms, if you're listening, Father's Day has not yet arrived. So if you go ahead and click on the link in the show notes, you'll be able to get it via Amazon by Father's Day. So remember that. But okay, so things like being adventurous, being heroic, being brotherly, emotional, romantic, wise, these are some of the things listed. Servant-hearted. These are wonderful, wonderful characteristics that sometimes are extra challenging for our outside the box kids. I think of some of my sons, yeah. And I have a mini Nathan. My third son is like, and when he heard I was talking to you today, he was thrilled. I'm supposed to tell you awesome. Hello. But he is so, man, I said, if I could just plug him in, we could light the whole house. He just has so much energy. And so that emotional component can be really difficult for him at times, finding a balance. Or I think of my son who's on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, being brotherly comes natural for him to like one other person, and that's his twin, So some of these traits are something they're going to be extra challenging for our outside the box kids. So can you speak to that in any way? Are those things that we say, well, you can still be manly even if you're not brotherly, or how does that look, filtered through those challenges?
Well, as you know, and maybe anyone who's read my previous book, Different, that I wrote with my mom, I grew up a different kid. I had and still have OCD and ADHD. I have dyslexia and a plethora of learning disabilities and mental illness that I've dealt with since I was very, very young. So I was always an out-of-the-box kid. And I can tell you that many of the chapters, actually most of the chapters I wrote, are things I'm still working on. And they're things I still struggle with. They're things that ultimately I want to move towards. And I don't think I've mastered any one of the things I point out as necessities to being a good man. I don't think I've mastered one of them, but they're all things I'm working on, practicing, trying towards. So I think my mom always said she believed forward into my life. And I think that's what God does for us in our own individual lives. I think that God sees us where we are and accepts our mistakes and our shortcomings and our limitations. For the different kids, God knows our limitations, and you parents, you know your children's limitations, but you still believe forward into their lives. You encourage them towards better, to work out those muscles of emotional health, of physical health, of mental health every single day. And it's not going to happen in one fell swoop. It's going to happen in step by step. So I think when you are looking at, the 12 chapters, all these things that make up a good man, I think it can be daunting to be like, well, I don't know if I or my husband or my kids will ever be all of those. And I think what I want to convey is, how do I say this? No, we'll never be totally as we are until we're, until we're in a better place. But I think that all of these things are things that every man can move towards. Some of them will be easier, some of them be harder, but each one can be moved towards in gentle steps. And so I think as mothers and as wives, I think it's so important, even with the different kids and in the different husbands, perhaps it's believing forward, even the things they aren't necessarily good at, that they can start noticing the ways they're moving forward and making progress, even the things that might not come natural to them. Because I guarantee you, a lot of these things still don't come natural to me. And I literally wrote the book on it, but they're things I'm every day trying to move towards and practice in my own life. And hopefully one day I will be a stronger and better man because of it.
Right. Oh, that's so encouraging. I'm a huge proponent of not limiting our kids, of not saying, oh, he can't do that. He's unable to have a conversation with more than one person, because I've seen in our home, I mean, amazing strides happen that if you would have told me 10 years ago my kids would be capable of, I would have had my doubts. So, I mean, you never know how your kids are going to grow. And so I think the point, what you're saying is just to have them on that path pointed in that direction.
The fact that I wrote a book probably is still amazing my mom, considering I was the ADHD, always asking questions, always wiggling, and dyslexic little boy. And here I am actually writing books when I couldn't even sit down and read one for 2 minutes when I was a kid. So that goes to show you what believing forward and little by little does in your kids' lives. Absolutely.
Right. And leaving that room for growth and really looking at your child specifically for who they are and what that looks like for them. You know, like I gave the example of my son on the spectrum having like one person in the world he can be brotherly with. Well, maybe eventually two people
Absolutely.
he can, you know, and that would be growth for him.
Yes, absolutely. That's amazing.
So moms, obviously, we've just mentioned your mom, and I've given some examples. Moms have a pretty big role in our boys' lives.
Yes.
So how can we nurture them to be good men? How can we look at this book and read this book and kind of, like I said, have them on the path, pointed in that direction? What are some things that we can do? You mentioned the one about believing forward, which I think is so critical. Because if you say he can't do that, you're drawing a line in the sand, and then I bet he can't, you know, or even if he did, you might not notice. So leaving that window open, I think, is huge. But do you have some other tips for moms out there, especially with our wigglers and our, you know, our little guys that want to be overcomers, you know, how can we love them and nurture them to be good men?
Yeah, you know, I actually just spoke with my mom about this, and we were talking in reference to my book about how important moms are to boys becoming good men. And I think sometimes we forget that. We forget, you know, of course, it's going to go without saying, or maybe it isn't now, but it's going to go without saying that fathers have a huge effect on who their sons become as men. But I don't think moms know how great a weight and power they have in their sons' lives and who they become. And I'd say some of the most important things as I look back that my mom did for me that helped me become the man I am today, that if I have any goodness to me, that was a huge part of me finding that, is one, like I said, believing forward. She believed forward into my life. She saw what I could be. Two, she accepted me for who I was, not who she thought I should be. I had an older brother who was easier than me. He was better at school than me. He wasn't as wiggly or loud as me. And she never said, "Why aren't you more like Joel?" Instead, she said, "Joel was made a particular way, and so were you, Nathan." And so she accepted who I was and said, how am I going to help Nathan live into his gifts and his potential that is totally unique from any other boy, from any other man? How can I help him live into those? So it's accepting and loving who God has created your kid, not in reference to anyone else or in comparison to. And I think three, it's spending time. You know, I think we live in a world often where I see men are unable to show vulnerability, and men are unable to express their emotions. And you know, believe it or not, men are humans too, and we have emotions sometimes. And of course, there are healthy ways and unhealthy ways to express those. But there's a special thing that happens between a mom and a son when a mom gives her son a safe place to be vulnerable and to talk about things that are really soft on his heart, his worries, his doubts, his hopes. And when that happens, when a little boy, and to be honest, I still talk to my mom multiple times a week. She's one of my very best friends. When you create that space for a young man to be vulnerable, it's a space he can grow and heal, and it will be something that propels him on to greater health and strength in his entire life, because he knows he has a safe place to work through things, to wrestle with things, to ask things in a gentle place. And so I think just those few things can make literally all the difference in a young man's heart as he's trying to become a good man. And it's something that moms have such a heavy influence on. Never doubt the influence of mom in their sons becoming good men's lives.
That's wonderful to know, because I do think, especially as they get older, you start to think, I feel like there's this false idea floating around that, the boys belong to the mom until like age 10,
Totally.
and then you got to hand them off to the dad to make them into a man or whatever, and that, and that our role suddenly takes a back seat and they don't need us anymore, because now they're going to go be men. But I do think, I mean, and you tell me, because mine are not quite we've just embarked on teenhood. We've got twin 13-year-olds, but it seems to me that boys are going to relate to their mom in such a different way than they would their dad, and come to them for different reasons to nurture and build different parts of who they are. Like you shared about being vulnerable. And so it seems like in the teen years, instead of backing away, we almost need to draw nearer. Would you say?
Absolutely. No, it's you're absolutely right that I'm so lucky to have a dad who built into me, and he had very specific strengths. He was so good at igniting my mind and investing in how I thought about things and I'm still so blessed at 30 years old that I am so close to my mom, and she is still that safe place where I can ask questions and find a gentle answer and someone I can be vulnerable with. And so, no, it never stops, that relationship. God gives kids both moms and dads for such a specific reason, an important one, and their roles never exhaust. They never are done. I'm so happy that I have two parents who love me in such unique and different ways, but they're both so necessary to me becoming the man I became. You're absolutely right. That is so important for every parent on each side in a kid's life. It really does make all the difference, and it does provide such different, unique things that is still ministering to me today.
That's so good that you mentioned both parents, because obviously most of the people listening right now are women, and so they want to know how they can be involved. But the book being called Good Man does insinuate that this could be something really powerful for dads and sons to connect over. And I had my husband read your book, because it's one thing for me to sit on here and say, oh yeah, it's great, you should go be a good man, and then it's another for him to read it and say, yeah, this is wonderful. So he really enjoyed it. And one of the things he liked the best, he said he loved how, because he has ADHD. So for him to sit down and read something, can be a challenge in and of itself.
Kindred spirit.
Yes. So he loved, it's really easy to follow, easy to relate. You've got the headings broken down and then a quote under each one. And he's like, that just, seals the deal, because you read the quote. I think your first one was adventurous, right? And you quoted Aragorn. Is that? And
Aragorn from Lord of the Rings, one of my very favorite heroes of all time.
Yes. So you read that. And I know for my boys, they're not quite old enough yet, but once they read it, like, they're in with that. If you can catch them with that quote, they're going to be in. So I know for him, he's excited for the time that he can share this book with the boys. And he brought up such a good point, because I think this is a real struggle for some dads. He said, your book opens the doors for conversations that need to happen, but can be very difficult to launch.
Absolutely. I agree with you that, it's a scary thing sometimes, talking about the realities of what men will face. And just to touch a little bit on what we talked last, maybe some of the moms out there don't have a dad in their son's life, and that can be so hard. But I want to acknowledge it, maybe that in this book, it might give you a little perspective into it, both the moms and the dads, into what men realistically will face and what they'll struggle with and what they'll deal with and how they'll deal with it in this age and in this time. And so I hope this can be something that that may be a way to start looking into and breaching those subjects with young men who are approaching manhood and the world that they will live and the calling that they'll have and the struggles and the realities of life that are out there, and how we can approach those struggles and difficulties and the darkness of the world in a way where God is present and is leading us through those in a healthy, loving, graceful, forgiving, but ultimately triumphant way.
Yeah. And I love that you brought that up about single moms, because you're right. That's, I don't want to skip over that or, ignore that that's a reality for a lot of people. And so this could be a wonderful bridge to help in those situations. For the dads, though, how do you see this book being utilized? Maybe in a homeschool situation, or because I don't know, a lot of homeschool dads might not, if they're like my husband, they work a very typical day. They leave,
Sure.
at 6 a.m, get home at 6, 7 at night. Like, they don't see the ins and outs of our homeschool days. So this could be a way to kind of bring them in. But I could see this book being used, as like a book club between the guys, and go out and discuss it. But how do you see it being used by the dads?
Absolutely. Well, I think any dad of any son who is getting ready to enter that stage of life where he will take on responsibility of making his own choices and becoming the man. I remember when I was kind of on that cusp, when I was, about 17 and I was looking towards my future of leaving the home. I remember my dad started meeting with me weekly, and very, very specifically, obviously we hung out all the time, but very specifically for a time in which we went through a book together, and we would each read a chapter during the week, and then we'd sit down and we'd talk about what we saw in the chapter, and then he'd ask me a few questions about what I thought about these things and how that might play out in the life I was planning to lead. And so I think it might be a really helpful and a really maybe valuable time that you look back on and love with your son as they are entering manhood, to have a time, it's 12 chapters, maybe 12 weeks long or 12 days long, whatever it looks like for you. But you sit down and you talk about each chapter, because there's questions at the end of each chapter. And I think it'd be so valuable to maybe sit down and talk about each of those questions. And I also see maybe even church groups or book clubs. It'd be so great. I love getting together with my guy friends and talking about real and true things. So if you have some friends, or maybe a few dads and a few sons, will get together and they'll talk about these questions and these aspects and what it might look like in their lives specifically, and go through the questions at the very end and read the verses together, maybe read the prayers and have a prayer time together. But I think there's a lot here that would be really great for dads and men in general, and maybe just a bunch of husbands even. I know men aren't great at getting together, but it's so important that we do, because it really is helpful. But I'm hoping this book can bring men together in some sort of communal way, either be it fathers and sons, or husbands and husbands, or friends, or whatever it is, to really talk about these things that men need to be talking about, and to talk about these things in an open and loving and graceful way, but that will spur us on to our best selves, who God has called us to be.
Yes. And I love how you mentioned the intentionality behind it, because I think too, and not to throw dads under the bus, but this might be more, they just kind of want it to happen a little more casually or organically, and not make it a thing, or not be cheesy about it, or whatever. But it's not going to happen. Like, life is busy, family is busy, homeschool is busy. I mean, there will be things that we really need to carve time out for. And I think there are some thoughts out there about, boys just somewhere around 18 become men, like on their own or something.
They figure it out.
Yeah, they just sort of figure it out. And that's not necessarily the case, so I love that idea of, as your son is, approaching that milestone of sort of launching, the Bible talks about us being, our children being arrows, like being shot out into the world. And so as that bow tightens a little more and you feel like it's almost time to let it go, setting up that time, being intentional about that. I mean, I can just imagine that was obviously a very special memory for you, that your dad did that, and a very powerful part of your launch into the world.
Yeah, it is. It was so important to me. And as I look back, it's something that that I see made such a difference. And it didn't take even that much time, but just a small amount of intentional time can make such a difference in a little boy's life. And you remember those times that you focused on these questions you had with someone who cared about who you were becoming. And it guided you as you did grow, having already answered these questions and gone through these things. Those were guideposts in my life. I talk to my parents often and tell them that as I grew and had all sorts of crazy situations in my life, I had their voices in my head, the times they did take intentional time to talk to me and teach and build into me. Those were the things that guided me in those moments of uncertainty and chaos.
Yes. And there's no formula, and you do such a great job at being honest about that. And by no means in the book are you saying, do these, 12 things and then you'll be a man. It reminds me of the poem, If you do all this and then you'll be a man, my son. And I love that poem. I'm just poking fun at it, but it's not a formula. It's not like do this thing and then you'll get this result, but it provides the tools that even if your child doesn't need this information right this second, like you said, later on down, those voices will still be in your head. They're still sowing truths into your life that you might need to access later. And that is so important to have. So
absolutely.
Nathan, will you honor us by giving us a little taste test of your book? Because I am sure that everyone listening is going to order it on Amazon as soon as we are done with this, because I know if I hadn't already read it, I would be sold. I think this is just such a great resource to have. But would you read a short snippet from your book for us?
I would love to. To set up this snippet, it's the end of the opening chapter, or close to the end. In the opening chapter, I start with me as a young man running up into my backyard as a kid and imagining myself as a hero I had seen in Lord of the Rings. And I have imaginary enemies and fighting with my wooden sword. And I talk about how that idea, that desire to be a hero and to live in a story and to live well and to be someone who mattered in the world that I had when I was a little boy still affects me today as a man, and it still drives me to become the man I'm becoming. And it's something that I think is in the heart of every single man alive. I think there's a desire to be a hero, desire to matter in the world, to do something that matters. And so this is the ending to that chapter where I try to bring it together. And it says, "The voice that calls to me is the same one that spoke the universe into existence. It's the unchanging, ever-present, and timeless voice of my Creator, calling out to the deepest parts of my being. And while I have wandered, stumbled, and fallen along the way, my Creator's voice still speaks. Even though I'm an imperfect and struggling man, it calls me just as it did when I was a young boy fighting imaginary enemies on the hill, telling me I was created to be a good man, and I can be, should I only listen and obey."
Fantastic. That is a wonderful peek at what your whole book is. And so I highly encourage everybody to take a closer look at this. Nathan, we know you've just published this wonderful resource for us, but do you have anything else that you're working on?
Being a creative and someone who loves stories and being in a quarantine currently and working on about a million things. But right now I'm actually working on another book in the same publisher, and it's going to be called Letters to a Young King. And it's going to be where this one is about stories, and this one is my thoughts and essays and more kind of the overarching view. This one will be very practical as I go through Psalms and Proverbs in a 40-day kind of study for young men and give them very practical ideas of what it's like to be a king of the world that we inhabit. So I'm really excited about that. And that's going to be out in the next probably year and a half. So I'm working on that very hard in my home. And I also just started a podcast just like this one. It's on faith and film and philosophy and art and culture and all the fun things that always inspired me as a kid. And I do it with my friend Joseph Holmes. And we're actually doing a podcast on the title is called Does Homeschooling Make Kids More Creative? And so I'm so excited to be doing that one. So so, and then addition, I'm making a movie, and I just got the first cut, and it's a Christmas movie, and I'm really hoping it'll be out this Christmas. It's about a bunch of people who get stuck in a diner on Christmas Eve, and kind of how all their stories interact. And so I just love working on things creatively, and I'm so blessed that I'm allowed to do that. But if you want to know more about what I'm doing and where you can find me, please find me on social media. Just search Nathan Clarkson anywhere, or go to my website at nathanclarkson.me. And the podcast is called The Overthinkers, so check that out too.
Oh, I love the name of that. I'm so excited to find out about all of those things, but especially your podcast. I can't wait to listen to that episode.
Oh, thanks.
So we'll definitely put all the links in. There'll be lots to search, and everything you've been putting out is just wonderful. So we cannot wait to see the rest of it. So thank you so much for talking today, Nathan. It was just a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Homeschooling Outside the Box. If you are loving the show, please head over to iTunes and leave a review. This is a great way to help other moms just like you find encouragement in their homeschool with their outside-the-box child as well. For more encouragement, be sure to head to cindyrenna.com, and you can check out some great blog posts as well as a shop that will help equip you on your homeschooling journey.